All right, everybody. We'll let people join, come on in, and welcome everybody to the Volleyball Summit. We appreciate those that have joined and accepted our invitation to kind of be among some of the top and leading kind of volleyball programs in the country. My name is Jeremy Goldberg. My technical title is President and Quarterback at LeagueApps. I did play volleyball in the 8th grade. We won the middle school championships in Dallas, but I'm not good enough to claim a position. But for the purposes of today's conversation, maybe I'll serve as setter as I set up conversations with some incredible leaders and different perspectives here as well. One of the things that's been amazing, when I think back to before COVID, is the opportunity I had to spend so much time with so many great volleyball programs around the country. And whether that was going to the AVCA and spending time in Pittsburgh with lots of organizations, or going to Indianapolis for the championships, and really being part of the community and appreciating how entrepreneurial the community is, and the kind of leaders that we saw among volleyball organizations everywhere. And certainly COVID has tested everybody that's been involved in youth sports. But we know in particular it's been challenging for a lot of volleyball programs, whether it was because of where you were based, whether it was because of your reliance on indoor facilities. No doubt that this has been a challenging period of time. And at the same time, we know that as entrepreneurial organizations, you haven't stopped, but you've been innovating the way that you've engaged virtually, innovating and adapting your programming, and more importantly, innovating in the way that you're coming back and helping to restore a sense of normalcy in this country, where youth sports may be some of the most important activities that we can offer this country, right? The sense of getting kids out there playing again, right? The sense of community that can be created through sport at a time of division, the sense of opportunity that we can offer up. So what you're doing is important. And what we wanted to do is gather some of the greatest minds here to help support you to have the kind of impact and influence that you want to have as well. And what we see is something very optimistic when we look at our data. What we're seeing is a tremendous amount of growth, where you're seeing over 80% year-over-year growth over the first 4 months of the year for volleyball organizations that are on the LeagueApps platform. And so there's a growth, there's a demand that's even greater than what we saw pre-COVID, and you are coming to meet that opportunity. I think the other thing I'll say is that this is a chance for additional innovation. There's a Harvard Business Review article that we'll go ahead and post in the chat. It's something that I remember early on as a leader of my own company, trying to figure out what was happening during COVID, and really saying, as much as you want to kind of retreat or play defense a little bit, we got to play some offense here, right? We can't stop innovating, right? Whether it's in our product, whether it's in the way that we wanted to engage the community. And it turns out this Harvard Business Review article talked about and looked at what happened to organizations in previous massive disruptions in our society or economic crisis. And one of the common denominators that they looked at was that the organizations that had the most success were ones that played the mixture of offensive defense. About 9% of organizations, when you look back a few years, will look back at a crisis and say, wow, that was actually something that helped propel and advance our growth. There's a bunch of organizations that will kind of middle along, and there's a number that may go under and disappear. And just by being here today, I think you're sending a signal that you're in that 9%. The folks that will look back at the period of time and what we've just experienced over the past 15 months and say, wow, well, that was painful and it was difficult. And it was certainly something that all of us experienced so much tragedy and loss. We've gained from that. We've learned from that. We appreciate what it is that we do, and more importantly, we can improve and grow moving forward. So that's the opportunity we have. And to borrow from John Wooden, the famous basketball coach, one of the winningest coaches of all time, it's what you know after you learn. It's what you learn after you know it all that counts, and that's the spirit of today. So I'm excited to start by bringing in someone that, admittedly, I've never seen play volleyball. I have seen play softball. He's a terrific softball player. If anyone wants to play softball in New York City, Neal's always looking for a game. But Neal and I have known each other for a while. We've been partners in the context of venture development and business. And Neal's one of the top entrepreneurs that I know, and more importantly, one of the best communicators I know. And the reason I invited Neal here, he's the co-founder and CEO of a company called Begin, which is the parent company of Homer. It is a incredible kind of early learning, childhood learning technology platform that has built an incredible team, has incredible investors. He's also a co-founder of Savin, which is the largest streaming service for South Asian music in the world. He was also built a company even before that. So he's someone that has built businesses that have generated an enterprise value well north of $2 billion. And so he knows about scale, but he also knows about starting small with 1 or 2 people in the room. And so the challenge and opportunity with Neal being here is to help us think a little bit about what is the keys to growth and scale, right? As an organization that wants to have greater impact on the world, that wants to have more participants, that wants to have more revenue so that you can reinvest back into your programming, into your coaches or your facilities. how do you grow? What are the secrets of that? So let's step out of the volleyball world for a second and bring in Neal Shenoy. Neal, thank you for joining us and being here for the Volleyball Summit.
Thanks, Jeremy. And thank you to all the people joining today for this conversation. Hopefully we can be of some help and inspiration.
So Neal, before I jump in with some targeted questions here, maybe just level set a little bit with a little bit about your background. I give a brief perspective on it, but what gives you authority to talk about growth and scale? Why should people in the volleyball community listen to you?
Sure. I'll share a bit of a personal story and a professional story and mix the two along the way, just for a little bit of context, and hopefully you guys get to know me a little bit better as well. I am a New Jersey native and very proud New Jerseyite. I'm actually in New Jersey today, despite having my apartment sit idle in New York while the world comes back to normal, hopefully soon. And so I grew up as the son of immigrants in northern New Jersey, product of public schools, and sports has been a really, really important part of my life, both playing and watching. For those of you that are Yankees fans, we can spend some time talking about that. If you happen to be a college basketball fan, Jeremy and I both went to Georgetown. That's how we met. So big advocates of the Hoyas and what they've done both socially and on the court. And then I also happen to be a Washington football team fan, although I don't like to admit that until recently. I think the new administration hopefully gets things done. But one of the things I always say about startups is that the level of growth that you will have in a startup is proportionate to the level of growth that you'll have personally. It is impossible for a startup to grow 100% if you're growing 10%, because startups, companies are humans. And so part of the biggest challenge that we have, and it's very circular, is the faster that you grow, the faster your startup grows, or the faster your startup grows because of this massive market opportunity, the greater growth that you're expected to have as well. So dynamism creates dynamism. And I say that because growing up, I think what was really compelling was being in a public school environment, playing sports, challenging myself via competition, but knowing early on that I want to dedicate my life to the creation of new businesses. And so I had an opportunity, very fortunately, to start off on Wall Street. I ended up working there with one of my oldest, dearest friends. We always had this ambition of starting companies together. We started 5 companies and supported 5 companies along the way, LeagueApps being one of them. One of the biggest accomplishments that I've had is recruiting Brian and Jeremy to help lead the LeagueApps organization. And they've done an amazing, amazing job as both leaders and the soul of amateur sports, I would say. But we've learned a lot during that process. And there's been as much personal growth as there's been professional growth along that journey. As Jeremy mentioned, what I'm proudest of is that we started 5 companies. We've never had a company fail. We've never not grown in terms of value. We've never not served millions and millions of consumers along the way, but it's been painful. It's been challenging. And that growth has come with a lot of personal development as well. So hopefully a big theme of what we can talk about today is what we have to do as individuals for the benefit of our organization. And if we can impart some of those lessons, those inspirations, those moments of thought, then I think hopefully this will have been a productive session.
I love the framing, and I think we can talk about both personal growth and organizational growth. One thing it reminded me of, and we'll post the link in the chat, is there's a great interview, a podcast. I'm a podcast guy, with the COO of Shopify, which is worth well over $100 billion. It's an amazing company, built in Canada, I think in Ottawa, outside of the kind of echo chamber and ecosystem of where a lot of entrepreneurship has happened. And he was interviewed with Tim Ferriss, and he talked about the mindset that he has, where he basically says, I interview for my job every year, right? As the COO of the company, one of the people who've led this. And the idea is that, imagine you're running a volleyball club. If you said, hey, I'm interviewing for the job of running this organization every year, then that forces the mindset of what is it that I need to do to get better, to adapt to those circumstances. And to your point, Neal, when you grow personally, it kind of connects back to the ability to kind of grow the organization. And you're also modeling for the coaches and for the kids and the families in the organization, because you're in the development business, right? Of developing not just folks to play the game, but to be impactful in life. Yeah. So let's start maybe on the question of organizational growth, and then we'll talk and maybe end in personal growth, which is, what have you learned is the secret across 5 companies that is the success to growing and scaling? And especially if you think about a volleyball organization, and what they're dealing with, especially if they want to expand to more facilities or more programs, or in some cases, other states or other areas. What are the secrets you've learned to kind of growth and scale, the key ingredients?
Absolutely. There's a lot. And what I'll try to do in today's conversation is to create frameworks, to simplify, to provide anecdotes, to provide data, because we have a limited amount of time. And the best thing that we can do is to create a framework by which you can examine your own business, your own journey, your own leadership through that lens. So some of the secrets, the ingredients, the playbooks to success that we've seen work, number one is you have to have a North Star, right? You're on a journey and you are taking individuals, whether it's your team, whether it's your investors or partners, whether it's your employees or your customers on that journey. And so it's really, really important to be able to communicate what the North Star is. What's the destination that you want to reach? That's important because it literally, like a North Star, becomes the guidepost of appreciating why it is that we're doing the things that we're doing. So just a simple declaration of what your North Star is. It may be to build the most effective organization around volleyball in your specific city or in your state or in your community. Or it may be a certain level of customer experience that you want to deliver. It may be about just building a love of volleyball and a love of sports. Whatever that North Star is, and as specific as you can be, it's really important to declare that. It's a declared intention. It tells everybody where you are marching. The second layer of that is context. Why is that your North Star? Why is this important to you? How does it connect to your personal beliefs and your personal ethos? And what's the plan that you're going to follow, in essence, to be able to get there? Now, the best laid plans are always subject to change. But what's really, really important is for people to appreciate both where you're going and effectively how you're going to get there and why that's important to you. Again, critically important to be able to set that context. If not, that's strategy. The third is to secure commitment, right? So if you explain to people what the North Star is and you share with them what that roadmap, what that blueprint is, it's an opportunity for people to challenge smartly what that North Star is and what your beliefs are. If you don't express that, people can't challenge, they can't question, they can't accept. It's a really critical, important part of getting to commitment, the ability for people to understand, for people to have dialogue and to communicate that. And the last piece of that is culture. Okay. Now that you've expressed a North Star, now that you've communicated a roadmap and the why behind that roadmap, now that you've had those conversations around the commitment to those to that North Star, you've got to be able to manifest that in the form of a culture and a set of expectations. Because business, as we know, is so dynamic, it's so unpredictable that all you can do is control your inputs, and the culture is the inputs that you put into the process to hopefully get those outputs as well. So I would say those are the foundations, those are the bricks of a high growth business. It seems simple, it's hard to execute. You've got to be a student of this day in and day out, week in and week out, month in and month out. The last thing I will say, which is a little bit cautionary, is that along that journey, along that North Star, there are going to be people that get you from point A to point B, but oftentimes won't be able to get you from point B to point C. And that's okay. That's okay. What you have to do is to be able to confront that and understand that and be content with the fact that, hey, maybe the team that got you from A to B or from B to C is not the team that wants to or is capable of getting you from B to C. And that's hard for an entrepreneur. It's hard for a founder, but it is quite honestly disrespectful to not confront that and not have those conversations, because you'll hold yourself back, you'll hold the person back, and you'll hold the organization back as well. And so we've had to, even despite our success, constantly evolve our management teams and our leadership teams to meet the next challenge that's in front of us.
So Neal, I love the framework that you shared, and maybe just to kind of pull two threads. One of which was you talked about the idea of this roadmap, right? So you have a vision, right? That's inspiring. I mean, you think about leadership examples and John Kennedy saying, "Hey, we're going to get to the moon by the end of the decade," and so you're setting an ambitious North Star, right? That everyone can orient around. And there's a famous story. I'm going to paraphrase it, but basically, I guess it was on a visit, and I ran into someone who I think was in the janitorial services, and they were asking, what are you doing? He was kind of cleaning up and mopping. He's like, I'm helping get somebody to the moon. right? Because everybody could connect their individual job to what that is. And the analogy and application, I think, in volleyball is, especially during COVID, everyone out there, great organizations are more than simply about wins and losses, right? Or getting people on a court, right? What we learned through this period of time is that youth sports is about so much more. It's about winning at life. And if you can establish a North Star for the kind of organization you want to be, that allows people to be the best they can be, not just as athletes, but as individuals, that's a powerful vision you could share. And then ultimately how you deliver that is that roadmap. So, so when you think about the key elements to roadmap of success, you know, I think part of that ultimately is how do you market, how do you tell that story is part of that roadmap, is the ability to brand yourself when it seems like there are a lot of other people maybe offering volleyball or other sports in your community, or in your case, maybe there are other apps that offer kids access to reading and learning. So what have you learned about the secrets to marketing and branding and the ability to tell that story so that you can help differentiate yourself from other alternatives?
Yeah. Jeremy, before I answer that question, just to be able to pull back what we just talked about in terms of frameworks into things that are actionable, a North Star should be a 3 to 5 year horizon. And by the way, you may never achieve it. That's why it's a North Star. It's a guidepost. Your plan should be an annual plan, maybe a quarterly plan. It's one horizon within that 3 to 5 year journey. You should seek to get commitment from your team every month or every quarter against that plan, because plans change, environments change, pandemics hit. And then your culture is something that you should be checking in on every single day. So think of this as different horizons. And if you execute each of those horizons well, if you have a wonderful daily culture, you get a commitment to a quarterly plan, you hit your annual roadmap, you will achieve that 3, 4, 5 year roadmap, or North Star rather. So with that said, you know, and to answer your question, there's a wonderful TED Talk. I know Jeremy is actually friendly with him, by a guy named Simon Sinek. And Simon Sinek talks about what the architecture of great brands and great storytelling is. And it's a 15-minute, it's really compelling. And I really suggest people watch that. It'll be a breeze. But what Simon talks about is that when you're building a brand and when you're building a narrative, you have a few options, right? You can talk about the technical features of what it is that you're doing. You can talk about the specific plans that you're going to execute. You can even talk about the credibility of your team. And for the most part, people don't care about any of those things as much as they care about the why, right? When you are purchasing an Apple computer, Apple can sell you on their features, the durability of their hardware, their price point, and differentiation. But what Apple does as a brand is it says, if you stand for the things that we stand for, if you believe in our why, join us on this journey. So pulling that back to volleyball, if you created your organization because you want to create a love of sports, that's a very, very powerful why. If you're creating volleyball because you want to help people unlock their potential to be a leader or to function a high functioning team, that's a very powerful why. If you've created a volleyball organization because you want to create confidence for children or for adults that have not had confidence, that's a very powerful why. That transcends the minutia of any individual thing that you've done. And that's what people will rally around. So when you think about the why, communicate the why in every single message, in every single plan, in every single customer communication, every single marketing campaign, because what people will gravitate towards is not the specifics of how you describe your league, not the plans, not the people, it's the why of you existing, which is what they will find so compelling.
That's such a great point. And I think there's so many different ways that if you have an understanding of that why, you can manifest that, right? And I think that's when you think about great brand, one of the things people talk about often is it's what they say about you when you're not in the room. What's the impression you could leave? And so if that why is communicated with the message on the back of your uniforms or the warm-up jerseys, right? Or in your facility, if it's communicated on an amazing new website that you might have, right? If it's communicated in the messages that you send out when you're communicating the schedule or your parent meetings, right? Or the way that you're thinking about the social media stories that you're telling, the content you're sharing. So I think the ability to drive that why, I think is a key aspect of not only just marketing, but it also seems to recruiting, right? The kind of people that want to be part of your organization. So talk a little bit about the secrets of culture and people connected to that culture, and especially how you scale culture, where especially if you're dealing with growing volleyball organizations where they're in multiple different locations, right? Multiple different teams. How do you scale what was a culture that maybe you're really excited about, you believe in, but now you have to grow it beyond yourself, beyond what you can see with your own eyes?
Yep. So there's a few principles of culture. A lot has been written about culture, and there's a lot to sort of meditate on. The first is that culture starts at the top, right? If you're a small organization, if you're a founder-led organization, everyone will look to you and how you manifest the culture of the organization as a barometer of what the culture actually is. So if you're the type of person that's really passionate, you'll have a passionate culture. If you are someone that's really hardworking, you'll have a hardworking culture. If you're a culture that's really customer-centric, you put that customer first, that's what everyone else will model. If you're a culture that is extravagant in terms of spending money, that culture will follow you as well. So the first thing is to look in the mirror and say, what do I stand for? And what am I modeling? And if people look at that as the cue for how they should be, is that actually represent who you are and what you're building? And is that the culture that you want to create? Because then the second thing that happens is culture at some point isn't about what you've created, it's about what you are. It's about what you've become. At some point, the culture is what the culture is, and it's hard to change or transform that culture because you're 10, 20, 30 people deep. And now you can put a poster on the wall saying, these are the 10 attributes, but you either are that or you're not, right? So you want to be able to sort of define your culture, model your culture, and shape that culture before it gets to the point where the culture is what you've assembled. What does that mean? If you don't recruit people consistent with your culture changes. If you don't manage people in a way that's consistent with your culture changes. If you don't act every single day, in every moment, in every meeting, the way that your culture manifests, your culture changes. And so what's really, really important is to say, again, like a North Star, this is the culture that we're trying to manifest. Here is what I'm doing in furtherance of that. And be brutally honest with yourself about, is your culture aspirational, but it's not what it is in reality? And close that gap as much as possible. And then you will recruit people, you'll manage people, you'll have conversations all consistent with that culture. And that creates a little bit of a flywheel of alignment and ultimately success.
Yeah, I think it's such a great point. And I think a few practical things that I've learned is, one is define your values, right? Those values need to be authentic to who you are individually and as an organization, and publish them. In fact, I'll invite anybody in the chat, if you're running an organization and you have published your values on a website or some document, go ahead and share that so other people can see that. But then it's a question of how you then define the behaviors connected to those values, how you celebrate them, how you make decisions based on them. So yes, at LeagueApps, when we're recruiting people, we have our 8 values. We're literally interviewing people very specifically as we divide up who's meeting with them and saying, yes, hey, do they embody that value? Is that, if they demonstrate that value in their work, is that aligned with who they are? Right. And then celebrating it, right? Every week we give shout outs at our all hands meetings for people who have exemplified that. And yes, we actually give trophies as a youth sports behavior once a year to our team as part of an awards ceremony. So this idea, I think, of celebrating and defining that culture, I think is great. When you think about as a leader and you're designing an organization, especially as you're growing for the first time, how do you think about the kind of hiring you do that gives you the kind of leverage to achieve what you're good at, but then complementing yourself with the other roles you need? How do you think about kind of building the right kind of team, especially for organizations that are hiring some full-time employees for the first time, or every hire is so critical because it's a smaller organization? Yeah.
So a couple of thoughts there. The first is that the study may be dated, but I think the principles are the same. There was a study published looking backwards. This was prior to 2000, about all the companies that achieved $1 billion of market cap, trying to sort of reductively appreciate what were the commonalities among all those businesses. And one of the few commonalities, that each of those organizations had 2 leaders, at the least, founders, people that were hired. And one of them was very externally focused, was very marketing driven. You can call that person a CEO. And the other person was very product and internally driven. And that was a really good 1-2 combination, because one person would always be thinking about the external, another was always mindful of the internal, and that's what they love to do. and they complemented each other. So part of what I would think about is that you have to be sort of both left-brained and right-brained in your organization. Someone has to be very externally facing, and someone has to be very internally mindful. And I think it's a very, very important and powerful dynamic. I think, for example, that dynamic exists very strongly within LeagueApps between Jeremy and Brian as a strong complement, number one. And of course, there's overlap and there's mix, and you can sort of switch roles. A second one is that there's no greater leverage you can bring to the organization, and there's no greater destruction of value than hiring the right or the wrong people. Because the right people just create so much capacity, right? Imagine if the average person works 50 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, that's 2,500 hours of output that person is putting forward. So when you think of it that way, and that's a commitment you're going to make to somebody, like it's probably worth spending a few hours up front to really ensure, to the extent that you can, that you've identified that right person. Because if that person is effective, they will really catalyze and motivate that organization. So what are some of the things that you can do to ensure that you have the right people? Well, number one, as Jeremy mentioned, tie everything back to your why, tie everything back to your culture, interview for that, create a consistency there. One of the things that we do at our company is we use a process called a simulation, which is to say that when a person progresses through the process, the last step in that process is to sort of show what you know, right? Because resumes, are easily embellished. It's hard to actually apply that. But if I'm hiring someone for marketing, I might ask them a question that say, hey, if you come up with any marketing campaign that you could for us, what would that look like? It's not about right or wrong. It's about the effort they put in, which is something that we value. It's how they organize their thoughts, which is something that they value. It's their creativity, which is something that they value. It's how much care they put into the communication of that, which is something that we value. It's not about the right or wrong. It's observing how that person goes through that process and what that tells you about what that would actually be like when you come on board. That adds steps to our process, but it's worked beautifully for us because effectively we have a glimpse into how that person would operate within our team, and you can then assess whether that person would be a fit or otherwise. So again, what I would say is hiring should be really, really critically important. Obviously, design a process that creates consistency and through the same lens. Spend the time in that process, create something special and ceremonial about your process, because you get that right person, you're going to get so much more leverage. With all of that said, I'm also of the belief that you can run the best process in the world, and 10, 20, 30, 40% of the time, you're going to be wrong. And in that scenario, you have to acknowledge it. You've got to be humane, and you've got to be able to move on from that person for both their benefit and yours as well. It's hard, it's tough, but again, you have so few opportunities to be able to get it right. You want to make sure you don't delay the success that you need.
I think that's great advice. And you talk about spending a few hours up front. I remember a mentor of mine actually said, to be successful at recruiting, especially when you're making some critical hires, you've got to master the art of the 4-hour interview. Yeah. And I thought he was sarcastic, and he's like, no, like literally, you spend enough time with them, you kind of go really deep. So there's a great book called Who that we'll post the link to. That's a process that we've developed and adapted. I think I've gotten as long as 3.5 hours in one interview. I haven't quite gotten to the 4-hour mark, although maybe over a few interviews certainly have. But when you have such critical hires, to your point, spending the time and going through a really rigorous process is important, and consistency in that process is also important. So you don't have bias, right? You can look at everybody through the same lens. I want to shift gears to a final topic, and I want to also invite if there's any questions in the chat. I know some folks that have sent that individually that I've incorporated in, but feel free to ask questions for Neal and I that you want us to cover a specific scenario. But I want to talk about this idea of personal growth, right? We think about growth and scale, and you mentioned that so much of this is about growing individually. So what are the secrets you've learned, or maybe what are the commonalities of really successful leaders who've been able to grow companies when it comes to the way that they've gone about personal growth?
So humility is the first word that comes to mind, right? I mean, the fact of the matter is that if you're successful in business, you appreciate that you know a lot less than you actually do know, and you're constantly learning. And if you're successful again, and the company is growing 100% year over year, well, that means you have to evolve, you have to grow, you have to change ultimately as well. And hopefully that's the fun of the process. The fact that you can be different, better, more mature, more effective as time goes on. So from a personal development perspective, I would say, number one, always start with humility. And that way you give yourself a little bit of grace. You're not expected to know everything. You're not expected to be perfect. You are expected to grow. You are expected to make mistakes. You are expected to learn. And that way there's not an expectation that neither you're not going to make mistakes, you're not infallible, and there's an expectation that you constantly have to work at it, number one. So humility is very, very important. The second thing I would say is find mentors and advisors that you trust. People that have been through this journey, people that you trust that can give you perspective, people that are so dispassionate because they're not in your business that they can call the baby ugly. They can say, hey, here's what you're doing really well. Here's what you're not doing well. And that's okay. But it's important that you see that, right? Have some outside perspective. I think that's number two. The third thing is you got to enjoy the process. You know, running companies, especially in a pandemic, has been really, really challenging. And sometimes you put a massive amount of effort in and you don't get the output. And sometimes you get lucky and you put a little bit amount of effort and you get a massive amount of output, but you got to really enjoy the journey, because that way it doesn't feel like homework. It doesn't feel like work. It feels like a passion. So again, the time that we have, and to be very, very reductive, I would say, be humble, constantly be looking to learn, expect to make mistakes, expect to improve, enjoy that process of growth, geek out on that. And finally, try to find people that can provide you outside perspective and outside objective points of view, so that if you can't see it, if there's a blind spot, they're helping you to see that in a non-judgmental way, which is very, very important.
Yeah, two additional tips I'll give to that is there's a great study. I think Tim Ferriss did this in a book where he looked at the 250 of the top performers across nonprofit and for-profit businesses, tech. And what he saw is every single one of them had a morning ritual of some kind of meditation or reflection. And that part of that ritual also included some notion of gratitude, a few things they're grateful for, and also a few intentions, what they wanted to achieve with their day. And ultimately what that to me suggests is, one, there's all kinds of ups and downs when you're running an organization or business. We've seen this in COVID. And so ultimately starting your day with some gratitude just says, hey, I'm going to appreciate with what I got, what I have, with everything else that's going on. And then the second thing is intention, which is making clear, like, hey, the most valuable asset I have is my time. How do I want to spend that today to kind of have the kind of impact I have? And bring that together. So there's different practices that you can use. I want to get away on this final question, which is, you know, we're coming hopefully to a new phase where where there's a light at the end of the tunnel, right? The world is not going to be the same as it was before COVID, right? Things are different. People have experienced different things. In there creates challenges, but that also creates opportunity. So what's the advice you have for entrepreneurial leaders running volleyball organizations, sports organizations? How should they think about, and how are you approaching this new period? And when you think about the opportunities that might be created, but there's still a lot of uncertainty out there.
Yeah. So look, we're humans, and we don't often like change. And we're all on a different spectrum in terms of our acceptance of change. And oftentimes we prefer the house that we're in, even though it's a little bit small, it's a little bit dirty, it's a little bit too expensive, it's not in a great location, than venturing out away from that house and trying to find something better, because the unknown is scary. What if the next house is not as good? Even though I don't know this is great, the benefit, quote unquote, the only benefit, the only silver lining to any crisis is that it forces you to change. It forces you to self-examine. It forces you to say, can I afford to do things the same way? Are there things that I haven't appreciated? Or is this an opportunity to be able to change? Obviously, we would never wish the pandemic on anyone, any family, any country, any society, but it's happened, and that's reality. And if we are to move forward from that, we have to take the opportunity to be able to reflect and say, what has this taught us? Maybe it's taught you about the importance of building really strong relationships with your customers and being empathetic. Maybe it's taught you the best way to have created a loyalty in the past year, maybe when you couldn't pay your employees, is to show them that you're trying and you really care. Maybe it demonstrated to you that there's a different way of serving your customers that's much more fundamental than a volleyball game or a match. Or maybe it taught you that you needed help, that you've been shouldering this burden yourself, and that's not sustainable in the best of times, let alone the least of times. But I really, really encourage everyone to say, what has this pandemic taught you as a moment of self-reflection? What can you carry forward to be better and stronger and more effective? I think if I had to answer that question, not running a volleyball organization, I would say some of the things that you're likely to learn thematically is that people really need a sense of connection. Volleyball provides that. And if you can double down on that ethos, it's a really, really powerful catalyst. I think also people need to be prepared for life. Volleyball and team sports help to create the confidence and the lessons in essence to be able to do that. Everyone needs some empathy in difficult times. And empathy goes a long way in terms of creating loyalty, in terms of creating commitment. And finally, everyone needs help. The biggest and the smallest need help. And there's nothing shameful in asking for help. There's nothing problematic in asking for what you need. And if you don't need, you won't receive. And so I really, suggest that in all that you're doing, the wonderful joy that you're bringing to so many people, double down on that why, double down on what you're providing, and watch as people flock to you because of the why of what you're doing. You're fighting the good fight. I think it's a really, really wonderful opportunity for us to sort of bring that back into focus and to keep that as sort of the North Star of why it is that we exist.
Neal, I can't thank you enough for the comments and perspective. And again, on a personal basis, we're not only very close friends and business colleagues, but also considering you a mentor. And even though I get to think about sports all day long and you get to think about early childhood education and nursery rhymes, there's a lot we learn from each other. And I think it's a good example of where you can take something from a totally different context and bring it here. So with that, I'm gonna let you go and then bring up some volleyball experts for us to continue the conversation about how they've navigated this. But thank you for joining us today, for inspiring us as well. And if people are interested in following up our follow-up questions with Neal, go ahead and let us know. And happy to do that. But thanks, Neal. And I'm gonna invite our other panelists to kind of come up here, Rodrigo, Cat, and Brennan. So come on up to the stage. And Neal, we'll see you later.
Take care.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm excited now because, I like to get a little theoretical. I can be comfortable at the 10,000 foot level, but I'm excited to then kind of bring this down now to kind of talk really specifically with some great volleyball leaders who I've gotten to know personally. LeagueApps is fortunate to work with them, and certainly have been inspired with the way that they think about innovation and leadership. So the brief introductions, if you don't know them already, Cat Dailey is the director and head coach at Northeast Volleyball Club. She helped found the club in 2018. They've grown rapidly, I think at least 32 teams at last count. And she before that was an assistant coach at Yale. And again, she's played the sport. She's leading an organization. She managed to pick an amazing time to start an organization going into a pandemic, but also has really demonstrated that entrepreneurial spirit. We also have Brennan Dean joining us today, and he is involved with youth volleyball in a couple different ways at both high school and club programs. So he's the varsity head coach at Torrey Pines High School, girls volleyball program, and he's also the owner and executive director of WAVE Volleyball Club out in California. I know a lot of things have been shut down for a while, but they're bringing us back, and WAVE obviously has such a great reputation for all the kind of amazing kind of experiences that you're offering people in your program. And last but not least, Rodrigo Gomes, who is the president and CEO of the Northern Virginia Volleyball Association, better known as NVVA. He's an entrepreneur and a business manager. I might say one of the most entrepreneurial people I've met in the world of youth sports in the time that I've been at this. And he's also a person who has a legendary number of technology integrations. And so if I was going to give an award for the organization using the most different kinds of technologies and process to help manage their scale, I don't know if there would be anyone that would compete with Rodrigo, in addition to the success that your organization's having on the court. So thank you all for joining. And maybe, as we transition from this conversation with Neal into a much more specific conversation about volleyball, you can start by talking a little bit about the specifics of your organization. And as you've thought about scale and growth, especially during this period of the pandemic, what kind of background can you share on your organization as people get to know you, and also the way you think about growth and scale? And I'll put it to Rodrigo to start.
All right, Jeremy, thank you very much. Thanks everybody for being here. And just a quick summary of more than 20 years of NVVA. We started in 1997 and was a youth organization without a facility, but that had a good into the volleyball world because there was not much youth volleyball in Northern Virginia at the time. And then that allowed for huge growth. And the organization grew very fast. And when 2009 came, the organization decided to get a big sports facility, a volleyball facility. And some issues came with that. The growth brought the facility brought really large bills, and those bills were having a hard time to be paid once the savings went away. And then I came in 2013 to be a technical director, and then became an executive director. And my goal and my challenge was to bring the organization from very bad financial situation at the time to be solvent. And 2021, we are here, and we went through a pandemic, and by using a lot of automations, using a lot of processes, we were able to not only go from a low profit organization to being profitable, but we also have a lot of time nowadays to think about growth and to manage a lot of programs throughout a pandemic. And and that's pretty much my passion, which is finding ways of not doing something that could be done by technology. So if that would sum me up.
Well, Cat, as we bring you into the conversation, and you think about kind of the kind of growth you've had, especially going through a pandemic, what's really been driving the growth for your organization? How have you managed to do that, especially even during these pandemic times?
That's a great question. So we started, as you said, in 2018, about 17 months before the pandemic hit. We took a pretty big gamble on getting a facility right away. And the reason for that was, we're out here in Connecticut, which I lovingly call the final frontier of club volleyball. I think we're an underdeveloped region, and we know that. And so we really saw a big opportunity to really take volleyball here to the next level. I grew up playing in Southern California, playing against Brennan's teams back in the day, and all the other good clubs out there. And I was shocked when I got here, and like, where are all the volleyball warehouses? Where are all the courts? So we knew that was kind of the big bet we needed to take, and the interest was there. There just wasn't a home for all the players. So we also hired a pretty tremendous staff, a lot of former professional players and some college coaches and things like that, and went in with the facility and the coaches that we knew could take the players to the next level. So we really focused on our product, I think, first, and then really relied on word of mouth early on. Now, in the months before the pandemic, I think we started to up our marketing a little bit more and go after different kind of subsets of the market. Youth, really, we started with kindergarten through second grade, doing some programs with college players, doing more leagues and things like that. So we've expanded our audience, I think, leading up to the pandemic. And we found that actually coming back from COVID, that our business was bigger than ever. There was still a huge demand for volleyball. It just looks a little bit different, with all the safety protocols. So still growing and still hiring pretty aggressively. That's been one of our big keys, is instead of going on defense, really going on offense and bringing in new staff, even as the pandemic was upon us.
That's great, Kat. When we think about Brennan, the perspective in California has been different in terms of, if you think about states where they've really shut down a lot of things. I know that hasn't stopped you from kind of driving and thinking about innovation. So what are the ways that you kind of experienced this pandemic and navigated that, and as you thought about continuing to try to both survive but also grow and adapt?
Well, for us, as soon as we were able to get back into our gym, we started thinking of creative ways of trying to help our athletes who were missing the recruiting opportunities during the pandemic. So we initially started with looking at technology of how we could run recruiting camps for local athletes and get it out in front of colleges. So we came up with a pretty successful program for recruitable athletes where we had a 3-day camp, and each minute was pretty much detailed out and scheduled, and each court side was recorded, and we made this huge database and we sent it out to all of the colleges and found a lot of success with that program that had never existed before. The other thing that we found was just complete transparency and thorough communication about COVID procedures, and when athletes were exposed to COVID. And we got a lot of positive feedback from how we handled that, even though those were really difficult phone calls to receive when an athlete had told us they had been exposed or had tested positive. But we found that made people just feel reassured that what we were doing was safe and that they could continue doing it. Our beach program, we have a 7-court facility indoor and a 7-court beach facility. And that was another area that had massive expansion for kids who were uncomfortable coming into an indoor setting immediately out of the quarantine. They felt much better out in the sand, and we have a wait list there that we're still dealing with, but a lot of different opportunities kind of expose themselves through our outdoor activities.
And as you're coming back and you're having to both manage the kind of growth, these new programs, recruiting, yet now you're coming back and running your other programs. How did you think about building the team to do that? Or who did you hire? Who did you turn to? Especially as you think about certain kinds of protocols, maybe that wasn't the expertise you had before, or the way you think about like recruit video and all these other things. Like how did you adapt your team and the skill sets to be able to do new things that you hadn't done before?
I think the first thing that I did was just admit that I had no idea what I was doing and reach out and ask for help. And that's something that I've always been comfortable with, is asking for help. And through the pandemic, there was just a lot of connection with peers that wasn't happening before. And by those channels opening up, I had more opportunities to ask questions and collaborate, which was extremely helpful for me. And my staff is an amazing group that teaches me every day something new. And I leaned on them a lot, and they stepped up to the challenge. And going back to Neal's point, we're driven here at WAVE about, well, what's best for kids? We say it every day. What's best for our kids? What's best for our kids? And the staff bled that through the pandemic and stepped up, and we did what was best for kids. And we thought, let's create these opportunities where they can get recruited and we can keep them active and we can keep them safe. So that's our culture.
Yeah, and I think that sense of humility that Neal was talking about, as you're saying, admitting what you don't know. One thing we saw that behavior happen a lot, where people were talking maybe to peers, maybe the competitor clubs, and one of the things we believe is that how do we continue that, right? So even today, the last part of today's agenda is going into breakout sessions, because it's one thing to talk about COVID protocols, but it's another to talk about like other ways, especially not only within volleyball, but beyond volleyball, not beyond your region, where you can learn about how you're impacting kids, how you're growing organizations, how you're hiring, all those kinds of things. Rodrigo, when you think about and looking through this period of pandemic, how have you thought about kind of new kind of ways of scaling and growing and navigating? You talked a lot about automation, but what have been keys to kind of driving kind of your growth and innovation, through this pandemic that you think is going to carry on as we hopefully emerge from it? I think Rodrigo, you're muted.
Yep, sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, so thank you. As Brennan was saying, because we did such a good job with the safety protocols during COVID, we built a lot of confidence with not only with the volleyball population, with general population. So we started seeing a lot of great returns now. The word of mouth is being great. And what we're learning is that people, they want to stay more time with us than not. So we need to offer a plan on what to do next. One thing that we're working on right now, we're creating a membership set up through a mobile app that's connected but separated from our organization, so that people can on demand book some things with us that they were not able to do before. Because like I said, the lifelong of an athlete with us has been increasing by a lot. Parents are always asking, like, what can I do next? What can I do next? I trust you guys. I just want to be around. I don't want to move around. I just want to be with you. So that was huge for us, and it's really paying off right now. Our numbers, LeagueApps can see our numbers. Our numbers are going great right now.
When you think about, Rodrigo, also, as you, one thing I think you think a lot about scale, it seems, is about process, and maybe you could speak to and maybe give us an example of what are processes you use that have helped you kind of grow and expand your programs or the number of people that you reach. Maybe give an example of where process has been really key to your growth.
Yeah, well, one easy to understand process is the process that Facebook, Instagram, all the social media do with you. Like, we all are a big tag. Facebook, Instagram is constantly tagging us as something. You like volleyball, you like shoes, you like this, and they serve us what we are tagged us. So we tag a lot of our athletes as what they need. Are they a beginner, intermediate, advanced? Are they good on serving? Are they not good on serving? So we use technology to measure their performance, and based on their performance, we have technology that serves the parents and the athletes with what they should be doing next. That helps a lot with the growth because, like I said, parents don't like to know what's next. They want to spend more time with you. They want to spend more money with you, and it's much easier when you are serving them the right things versus serving them advanced camp when they are beginners and so on. So tagging is a huge thing. It's a lot more complex on the back end as it sounds, but the returns are amazing. So I totally recommend learning about tagging.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And one of the ways to think about this is a concept of segmentation, right? If you use data, you have a way of categorizing and organizing people and then delivering things very specific to those folks. So there may be a group of people that really like virtual learning, right? Or virtual education, or maybe they want to do more volunteering and they want to work as part of the way you do things on the community level. So that the way of thinking about data and segmentation, I think is a great piece of advice. You know, Kat, one thing I think I've been interested in is that things are adapting, right? Even the way that people are playing, maybe it's shifting to leagues and there's changes that are happening. So speak a little bit about the adaptations or innovations that have happened in response to COVID that might carry over as we move to a different period of time and the way that you kind of adapted your own programming.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the two things that I think that we are going to continue to do that we started doing a lot during COVID was first, really expanding our kind of in-house teams and competitions. So we added a compete day for all of our club and open and regional teams, all the different levels of our teams, where every Saturday they're going to play real matches in our gym because we knew that we weren't going to be able to do that in convention center for a while. We weren't even allowed to go out of state until March this year. So we said, hey, we're going to make sure they get to compete and they get film to send to schools. We had live stream cameras put in that are constantly recording that they can download their film anytime after a practice or a game. So that was something that we said, hey, we got to take this into our own hands because we don't know what we're going to be allowed to do and we don't want that to be out of our control. The second thing then, the kind of bigger thing that we did was we, like Brennan, we've had a lot of collaboration with clubs that we used to be more competitive with, and now we're on the phone with them all the time. We're putting together scrimmages and things like that. And we actually put together a league called Tri-State Volley that brought together 6 of the top clubs in the New England and New York area. And we said, hey, we need to take matters into our own hands. We set up we kind of based it off of the format of the professional leagues with best 3 out of 5 matches and an international point system and a true standings. So each individual team is ranked by age group, and we're coming actually to the tail end of that with the championships coming up in June. And it's been very challenging to manage, but a huge success in terms of getting guaranteed play in on a local level when our first convention center tournament is this weekend. So, and we've been competing since February. So finding new ways to compete and make sure that the recruitable athletes are getting film and that they were, all of our athletes were getting opportunities to play in games and not just train, because that's what it was looking like. We were just going to be practicing for 3 months, and we said, hey, we need to figure out a better way to do this. So those things I think will carry on. They'll look a little bit different, hopefully expanded in terms of what we're able to do in terms of traveling. But that's been, one good thing that's come out of the pandemic.
One thing as you were talking and everyone's been speaking, I think is just important to acknowledge is you all are adapting and innovating, but the reality is this is not going to stop. It's not just because of COVID, right? We live in a world of constant innovation and shifts. And so ultimately, are you adapting that, right? In a matter of years, the way you're using augmented reality or virtual reality, like that is going to shift, right? Like that stuff's going to be part of these experiences, right? How people are recruiting and communicating as you're doing video, that stuff is shifting. So it's just the expectation that is going to happen. So are you, I think to use Brennan's term, bringing humility to that and saying, okay, I don't know those things. I've got to learn. How am I part of a community where I'm learning that together? Because the other trend we see is just there's going to be a lot of consolidation. There are a lot of people that are involved in volleyball today in smaller organizations that may not be able to adapt and innovate. And so the folks that are more entrepreneurial, that are more innovative, are going to be able to harness those innovations to deliver better experiences for families. And ultimately, I think that's what you all embody. Brennan, to maybe pick up on a thread that you brought up that comes back to something Neal talked about. You talked about learning from your team and the team that you have. And it seems a lot of this comes back to the people you're able to surround yourself with. So what have you learned about the secrets to building a team and building an organization, building a culture, and especially how you maintain that as you try to grow, as you try to do new things, where it's not just you involved in everything, but you have to kind of let it go and empower other people? What is that secret to kind of grow through culture and people?
It's a good question. And I actually already went to Amazon and bought that book you recommended, because I probably need to do a better job at it. But I feel very fortunate for my team. And I think, I stole this from somebody else, but I look for three things out of my team members. I look for passion, and I look for integrity, and I look for intelligence. And I think those three things lead to great coaches and great directors. So I want people that I can trust. And I always sit there in the interview and ask myself the question, could I go through a road trip through Mexico with this person? Could I sit in the car with them for 4 hours, 5 hours, to your point, the 4-hour interview? Because as a director, you're going to have those types of days and conversations where you sit with them in a room for 5 hours dealing with problems and parents and issues and teams. So just making sure that you guys can communicate together, and also I like to look for people that are good at networking, that are also able to reach out to their circle of mentors and colleagues and ask questions. So we have a lot of team members that kind of rely on different pockets of the world when asking questions of how they do things, pockets that I don't necessarily intertwine with as much. So I think that's an also very helpful attribute to have.
Those are great points. The one thing I'll offer up, at least for you, but if anyone wants to join us, Brennan and I are going to hang out and talk recruiting. I actually have a good deck on the who process and the secret to the 4-hour interview. So if anyone has any interest in that, you can go ahead and respond to the email with the invite, put a +1 in the chat, or let us know. And at least Brennan and I are going to get together, maybe have a virtual lunch and then talk recruiting, because I think it's so important. Rodrigo, when you think about the process of and how you scale people, right? Because you got technology of automation, but how do you think about bringing on the right people and scaling kind of the culture and values that you have and managing that part of your growth?
Yeah, that's a big challenge. That has been a big challenge for us. We have great people in place, but we're growing. I have about 21 people on staff now, and then that's between full-time and part-time, and then independent contractors, volunteers, over 100 people. And bringing new people becomes more of a challenge when we have so many people you trust on your team. You don't want to bring anybody that will break the chemistry that we have. I was able to have a good conversation with a friend of mine that works for Under Armour, actually, and she gave me some great feedback that we're using right now, which is 3 different stages of when we're trying to bring people in to our organization, which is 1, make sure you have a panel with the people that are actually going to work with that person. And that panel each person should have a very specific category they're looking for, which it could be influence, it could be leadership, so each person on my staff has a specific goal they're looking for in that interview. Second thing is make sure you have open-ended questions. Make sure because anybody can look at a resume and a cover letter and kind of say, okay, I know that person worked at this place and that place. But understanding experience is a lot harder, especially when you're going through an interview process to bring somebody that you never met before. And then the third thing, making sure that that person is able to talk to somebody in similar position in your organization, so that they can have the full picture of really what it's going to be like to be part of your organization. And we're still going through this process right now. We are currently hiring, but it's definitely making our life a lot easier to know if we made or not the right decision when we brought somebody in.
Yeah, it's great advice. And one of the things, there's a rating. I think the idea of panel interviews is really important. Whether it's bringing on your coaches, maybe it's people in your organization, maybe it's even if it's a really important hire for your organization, maybe you have a board of director or you have a mentor or someone else that you might rely on. Maybe it's a parent in your organization that you really believe in. But having that kind of panel perspective, and we use like a rating scale of 1 to 4. 1 is like, don't even talk about it, don't hire them, right? I will lay down in front of a car to prevent you from bringing them in the organization. 2 is maybe you could convince me. I could be open to it. I'm not necessarily advocating for them, but I certainly could be persuaded. 3 is I want to convince you. I want to hire them, right? I want to convince you that they should come in. And a 4 is I'm going to close the door, lay in front of a car. We have to hire this person. I'm stopping everything. We have to bring them in. And when you give that perspective of everyone be able to sum that up and hear everyone's kind of score, you start to kind of baseline that and allows you to kind of really have that high bar. And then also understand if someone believes strongly someone shouldn't come in, you give the opportunity to understand why they're making that recommendation. So great perspective and feedback that you're putting into place. You know, Kat, I think the final piece about growth and scale, and I certainly invite, by the way, any more questions on the chat, feel free to introduce yourselves or pose any other questions you want to know. You talked a little bit about that marketing plan that you kind of grew initially by word of mouth, but then wanted to be a little bit more intentional in growth. And it seems like as I've gotten to understand some of the programs that you all are doing, I mean, it's everything from mini volleyball to more social volleyball programs. You obviously the club programs you're running. So what have you learned about marketing and communications, right? You got this great organization, you've got great people in the organization, but how do you tell your story? How do you differentiate yourself? What is the way you've kind of built a marketing communications plan?
So I actually have a background in marketing. That's where I worked before deciding to come back into volleyball. And so that was one of the areas that I kind of honed in on right away is, hey, we need to have some sort of plan for this. I think it's an area where like our industry, at least in our region, is kind of lacking. So we got on Instagram right away before we even had a facility. We got on Facebook before we had any coaches. We started building an email list when we were actually still living overseas. So we were really focused on creating an audience and just kind of building some buzz. We were pretty bold in some of the things, our communications of what we said of, you know, hey, we're planning on being the best club in the area, like before we even had anything. And when I look back on it, it was pretty brazen, but we really believed in what we were doing. And so we built an audience of, I think, like, you know, maybe 600 or 700 people like before we had our first tryout. And then we do a lot of outreach to the, you know, high school coaches, and we did free clinics at some of the local high schools and middle schools and elementary schools even. And so some of it was, you know, donating our time and just making sure we were present. We invested a lot in gear too, because we wanted people to see our logo and our name. So we bought a lot of shirts before, again, gave them out from the trunk of our car. We did a lot of kind of grassroots stuff like that, bumper stickers, things like that. So people would just get used to seeing it. And then it would become, you know, a presence in our town, in our region. So it was a lot of different things. There wasn't really a plan per se. So you know, a spreadsheet of here's when we're going to do everything. It was we were moving a little bit too fast to do that. So that's something we're looking to solidify now as we grow more and we have more programs going on. But it was just kind of constantly talking about, hey, here's what we're doing, and getting other people to do some of the talking for us by giving them things they could share, shirts they could wear, things like that, to create some buzz before we even really had a product. And then we had to focus on making the product really good.
Yeah, it's such a good, one of the things I think I take from what you're sharing is the idea of that. I think the key to marketing is to think about, you have a story you want to tell. I think Neal talked about that why, Simon Sinek's framework and others, but then you have lots of different ways you can express that, right? You can express that through the swag, right? The shirts and other things that you might create. You can express that through your social media posts, right? Or the different ways you're doing that. So I think your website, so there's lots of different ways and channels to communicate. Rodrigo, just to follow up there, and then we'll end with Brennan, which is, how do you think about, you know, when you think about marketing, you've used technology in a lot of effective ways. So what is the way that you think about a marketing program so that in addition to kind of branding, you're actually doing really much more tactical stuff to ultimately get people to kind of know and sign up for your programs?
Yeah, marketing is harder than it looks, for sure. So Kat, if you're ever available, love to talk to you and learn from you on that. Marketing is very hard. But one thing that I learned is if you're able to divide your potential or current clients between leads versus current, that makes marketing a lot more clear. So, but for me, leads are people that don't know about my organization, that maybe don't know volleyball. And those are, hopefully for me, I want to make that pool really big because I want to have where to pull from. And then I have my current customers. So if you're talking to a lead, you are trying to nurture them through marketing processes and automations. We use some different email campaigns, and we use video through Instagram and Facebook to make sure we can track viewership of our videos, and then we also make sure we can use our money in ads in a more effective way. So if we post a volleyball video, a lead watch the video in a certain time, we can target them in a more efficient way with our money. And then when the athletes are actually part of NVVA, that's when our tagging comes into. We do assessments of skills, and those assessments, when they are within the organization, are able to tell us, like, now we can nurture the current athletes with different programs. So my suggestion is that it's very important for you to understand leads versus current customers, because those are two different conversations you need to be having all the time.
Yeah. So Brennan, I'll end with you, and then we're going to go to some exciting breakouts, I think, to continue these conversations. But when you think about this period we've just been through, what's the number one thing or two things that you've learned through COVID that might change your organization or change how you approach things? And when you think about the kind of impact you want to have, the kind of growth you want to have, in the next year or 2 years to come?
I did a lot of self-reflection with, just because we've done it in the past doesn't mean it's the right way to do it. And to challenge myself and my staff to be innovative, be forward thinking, and to think outside of the box. So we did things in our organization that I never thought that we would ever do. One, collaborating with a neighboring competitor to ensure that our kids had the best opportunity for competition right out of COVID. And it paid off. So that's something that I know that we will continue to do. Another thing that I kind of learned, I guess, through just reading about LeBron James and how much he spends on himself, is just investing in myself and my staff, and learning from other corporations about providing ways for furthering education for my directors, executive leadership programs, mentorships, things like that. I had not allocated funding in my budget for those types of things, and now that's a major priority for me.
Love that. And maybe just two things to ladder off is, one, I think, what we're trying to do at LeagueApps, beyond just the providing the technology, is really trying to create the community and the resources. So, I share your sentiment about how do we think differently, and ultimately, how do we start to learn from each other, and what are the ways to do that within the volleyball community, beyond the volleyball community, with other kind of youth sports leaders around the country. So whether it's our Slack group, whether it's other events, we want to make those available. And one thing I'll encourage people to do is to bring their staff, right? These are free events. There's other things we're going to do. We're about to start to announce some more in-person events. So we want to make available those kinds of leadership development opportunities as well, and put people in a position to take advantage of it. And I think the other thing I'll offer is this advice, which is to figure out your bouncy castle, right? And that may seem strange, but one of the most entrepreneurial people, organizations I've met, especially in the volleyball world, but youth sports more broadly, was what's happening down in Austin Juniors, and Glenn and Mike and Rachel. So I had the opportunity to kind of hang out with them, spend time with them, watching a tournament go on. And I was like, there's a bouncy castle inside the Dallas Convention Center. And what I think Glenn, I believe, realized was, like, wait a second, we got to have something for families who the siblings to come during the tournaments. How do we create a space where they can drop their kids off, they can be entertained, not only generates revenue, but it creates a more engaging experience. And I was like, who would have thought, like, how you came up with the idea of a bouncy castle to put inside of a convention center as a way of activation to make the experience better for families. And that's true of a lot of things that Austin Junior has done well beyond bouncy castles. But I think there's this opportunity to think differently, to look at something, to think about it, take a chance, and ultimately learn from each other. So, I certainly, we're privileged at LeagueApps to be working with your organizations. And more importantly, I know the kind of impact you're having on your communities, and eager to extend that. And so what we want to do is now move to the final part of the conversation here, because I do think that we've got this great discussion here. But what we really want to do is to continue the conversations and let people kind of learn from each other.